Okay, here we are, April 30th. Got some cheap China rep wheels, CP21s. These are 17 by 9 for the front and 18 by 9.5 for the rear. I've got some Federal 595 RS RRs. They were cheap, but they're 200 tread wear, so they're still pretty soft. They're just gonna get chewed up anyways. Then I took my R888Rs off of my Mustang Cobra wheels and put them on these. I like them. The rim doesn't poke out as much as it did on the 9.5 rim. So then pulled the, you know what, hold on. We pulled the tank out and started messing with the fuel tank there. And this is something I noticed. So here's a little bit on that. And we'll get to the engine here in a second. Okay, so here's one thing you want to do before you go and put all this crap back in the car. You want to test to make sure that each fuel pump is working. So me, I've got, you probably can't see it from there, but I've got my outside post as my positive, my outside post as my positive for the other pump. So I've got one pump over here, one pump over there, then the ground is in the middle. So right now we're testing that pump. They're inside, they're right next to each other, but we're testing one on the left side. So that one's good. So now we'll move this clamp over here to the other positive, and we'll test the other one. Both of these have a check valve inside, so it doesn't bypass back into the tank. And we're good. So both pumps are doing what they're supposed to do. It would suck to get that all back in and have no idea if one pump is working and the other one's not. So there you go. Okay, here's another fun thing to note. I've got dual 450s, dual Walbro 450s in this tank, and it flows quite a bit of fuel. So what I've noticed is that I've got both of them hooked up at one time to see how much it'll flow at once, and it's actually enough to suck the little bucket dry before fuel can replenish that little bucket in there. So if you're running dual 450s, this is something to keep in mind. Watch the fuel. It'll flow well at first, and then it'll kind of cut off when it drains the bucket inside the tank. So that's good. And then now it's not good. You can hear it. So I'll let it replenish the bucket inside of the tank. Do it again, and now it's full flow again. Then it'll drain the bucket. There it goes. So that's something to keep in mind for you guys that are doing dual 450s in the tank. If you haven't modified the bucket to let more fuel inside of that thing, it's going to drain it if you're not running like a full tank or something to where it spills over the top into the bucket. Okay, so here we are after it's all wired up. I'm not super professional wiring guy, but I do try to do a nice job with what I have. So I've got 12 gauge wires coming off of here because I was using a 14 gauge for the ground when I had both pumps going at the same time. Remember, the middle one is the ground. So I was using a 14 gauge for that to run both pumps, and you could feel it getting hot. So you definitely want to run fat wiring to decrease the amount of resistance in the wires. So I've got 12 gauge, 12 gauge, and then the middle one is a 10 gauge. So I've got them all coming out here. And then this is just cheap AutoZone loom and double shrink wrapped ends here. And then I run a clamp over here because I don't want this moving around. I want to be able to, if I have to, grab that and move it without putting stress, because these are just little plastic connectors on here, so you don't want to stress these points. So keep this nice and secure. But you don't have to spend a lot of money to do a somewhat decent job, so just keep that in mind. Again, this is loom, and I electrical tape it around every 6 inches or so just so it doesn't get all messed up, and then I'll run that into the cab and figure it out from there. So that's a little how I do stuff. Other people may do it differently, but this works. So, all right, then we put the tank back in the car, ran our wires in here, and we'll This is just obviously temporary right now. We'll put power and ground to that guy to make sure that there's no leaks, because I finished all of my hoses. So I've got the dash 10 coming up front here, and then it Y's out and goes to a dash 8 here and a dash 8 over there. Runs through both of the runs through the rails, then back through here to the regulator, through the rail, back to the regulator, then a dash 8 back to the tank. But I haven't tested it yet. That's why we want to test it. You don't want to test it when you're trying to start the car, because make sure you have no leaks before you get to that point. What else did we do? We pulled the radiator and the intercooler, all that stuff, so we could finish welding the hot side up. We made a brace because that guy will hold the turbo in place. You don't want to just let the weight of a 50-pound turbo hang off of your stainless manifolds. That's not good for it. So that's all welded up. I actually finished bolting up the water pump and putting the gaskets in there, finished bolting up the alternator. Don't know if I'm going to run that alternator, but all of the steam ports are all tight now. I say that as that one moves. Yeah, that one needs to be tightened up. See, this is why we check things. But that's where we're sitting. I think the next step is going to be to start running wiring. I'm going to put the Terminator X in here. So that's the little block for the wiring for the Terminator X to come through. Got some relays to figure out, and yeah, that's probably what we're going to end up doing next. Oh, I did decide that I didn't want a silicone coupler coming straight off of the turbo right there. The 90-degree silicone coupler. That's never really a good solution. So I've got an aluminum one on the way. So I'm going to cut this off and weld the aluminum one on there. I don't like doing that to turbos, because then when you go to sell a turbo, you've got this turbo that's got a custom bend the direction you want, and it's hard to sell. But I've already modified this one for the wastegate going right there, so it doesn't really matter. That and the turbo isn't all that expensive anyway, so it'll be fine. But that'll be way better than the silicone 90 coming off of there. The aluminum 90 is less likely to blow off of there. Then we'll just start buttoning things up. That's where we're at for now.